Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. This story was shared by you/sincerely the suicidal. I think there is a Wendigo in the Minnesota woods. First things first, I wasn't there, but I was the first person he told. This happened in southeast Minnesota. I am not going to be telling the exact location, but it was in a smallish forest on a long bike trail. One more quick thing. It was really windy this day. My friend, who we will call S, and his father were on a bike ride. It was about a 12-mile bike ride. So they are doing their thing when about 5 miles in S sees what he thinks is a deer. They keep going and S sees a flash of brown next to them in the trees, and it is like this thing is running next to them. Like keeping pace, but he doesn't hear anything. He points it out to his dad, and his father says that it's probably a deer, but he agrees it is really weird, so they keep going. They get to this little beach where they usually rest and look at the river. S notices something feels off. He notices that first of all there is no trees swaying. Secondly, there is no animal noises. Then he realizes he didn't see any animals the whole time they were there. Except the deer. The silence was heavy. It was like every animal left. The woods were silent. S tells his dad that he isn't feeling very well and that he wants to go home. His dad begrudgingly agrees. They get on their bikes and S is almost hyper-aware of his surroundings. They go for a while until S sees a flash of brown again and antlers. They keep going until they hit this clearing. The clearing looks like a big field with trees around it and a bike trail through it. As they enter the clearing, S looks back and there is the fucking beast standing on its hind legs, and he said it was like 9 feet tall. It had antlers and it looked like it had a deer head or some shit. He said he was terrified. They finally got out of the woods and the wind was back and there was animal noises again. I think this was a Wendigo, but I am not sure. I honestly don't know if I believe him, but we are in Minnesota and it wouldn't be impossible, but are we a bit too far south for Wendigos? If you have any ideas or theories, please let me know. Okay, apparently I haven't hit the minimum word count, so I'll give you more minor details. We are pretty much at the bottom of Minnesota. Nowhere close to Rosisu, Minnesota. Like I said, it was really windy this day, like really windy. I think S is kinda sensitive to the paranormal. Just a little bit. Although the Wendigo isn't really paranormal. They have been biking on this trail before. They didn't go the whole way, they went about half. I think it is too short to be a Wendigo. Is it possible it is a skinwalker? I looked on a map and the tribes that were in this area were the Dakota Sioux. This area usually has a lot of wildlife. It was before noon when this happened. He didn't see any other people other than him and his dad. Neither of us know what to think about this. I'll ask him about what it smelled like or if it smelled weird in the area. Second story. This story was shared by you/m_ATL518. Whistler or Wendigo in Georgia. Asterisk, first post ever on Reddit. Been holding on to this story for a while, and after finding this sub I felt you guys would be interested or have some input on what I could have seen. It's been almost 2 years and I still can't get it out of my head. That whistle. Growing up in the mountains of North Georgia, camping and hiking were things me and my brother did so often it was second nature. So anytime Ryan and I had a break from school, we would head straight for the woods. We packed our gear, let our parents know where we were going, and that was that, no questions asked. We decided to camp about midways through Jack's River Trail in the Cayuta Wilderness, and it's a trail we knew fairly well as we had used to a few times before to practice long hikes. We arrived at the trailhead around lunchtime, parked the car, got our gear out, and headed into the woods. We passed a few hikers as moved along and asked them how the trail looked, and the answer was always the same: wet. Jack's River Trail probably crossed the river 50 times as it went along its 17-mile-plus journey, and with the colder temperatures of late fall settling in, it was harder for the trail to stay dry. We moved deeper into the trail and started to look for a place to make camp. This is where Ryan and I made our first mistake. You see, Ryan and I have this rule. We don't camp near people if at all possible. Call us paranoid, but the last thing we want is for someone to drag us out of our tents and into the woods never to be seen again. So we always camped a pretty decent ways off of the trail and in the area that wasn't popular with overnight camping. Roughly 2.5 hours or so we found what we thought was the perfect place to set up for the 2 nights that we would be out. That we came up to Horseshoe Bend and ventured about half a mile off the trail into a clearing and set up. We built a teepee fire lay for that night and pitched our tents on either side. After setting up and unloading, we decided to walk back to the trail and go exploring around some of many swimming holes Jack's River had to offer. This was during Thanksgiving break, and I remember being surprised at how few people were on the trail. Maybe it was the weather or the fact that this was early in the week, but there didn't seem to be anyone hiking, much less staying the night. Around 5 o'clock Ryan and I headed back to camp to start our fire, make dinner, and settle in for the night. As soon as the sun began to set, the cold rushed in. We added more wood to the fire, sat close and just enjoyed conversation. Ryan was 2 years behind me in school. I was a senior and he was a sophomore, but growing up we had always been close. We always hung out in the same groups, played the same sports, had the same hobbies, etc. Around 9 we were settled comfortably around the fire. I had just texted our mom to let her know we were safe and getting ready for bed, and I remember we were talking about dreading going to our grandparents' house for Thanksgiving and having the same awkward conversations we had each year with family we only saw on holidays when things started to get strange. We were no stranger to sounds in the woods, and these woods were full of animals, from deer to black bears and even the random wild boar. If you are in the woods enough you learn to distinguish certain sounds, and what we were hearing I can only chalk up to as odd. What Ryan and I heard was what sounded like someone sneaking around slowly just out of eyesight. With an animal walking on 4 legs you hear a tighter group of steps, but what we were hearing sound very distinct to what a human sounds like when walking slowly or trying to move without making much sound. I remember we both pulled out our flashlights and shone it in the direction we felt the sounds were coming from, but that is what was so weird. Whenever we would fix our lights on a spot we thought the sound were coming from, the location of the sound would suddenly change. It was as if there were multiple people walking around us. That's when the whistling started. At first I thought it was the wind, and I remember thinking maybe the wind is just throwing leaves around and what we are hearing is nothing but the wilderness around us. Ryan looked at me and asked if I was hearing that. I didn't answer and was trying to focus hard on each individual sound. 2 consecutive notes with roughly a 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes. Over and over again. Ryan kept asking if I heard that, and I put my finger to my lips trying to keep him from talking. The fear I felt was incredible. My jaw was tight, my fist clenched, knowing I wasn't ready for whatever was out there, if it was anything at all. The whistling continued for what felt like forever, but thinking it through was maybe 5 minutes when Ryan finally yelled out into the darkness. "Hey! Quiet!" The whistling stopped. The crunching of the wood stopped. Nothing. I was pissed. I looked at Ryan with a, "What the hell," look, and he shrugged his shoulders. "I had to do something," he said. I just shook my head. We sat there in silence for a few minutes when the woods erupted with noise. Something or someone was running in a circle around our campsite. The whistling came back. 2 consecutive notes with the same 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes. How could someone whistle this loudly without cracking while also running? I was done. I stood up, shining my flashlight in all directions, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was screwing with us. Nothing. It felt close enough to touch, but we never saw a thing. That's when the movement stopped, but the whistling was still constant. It was so loud. Inhumanly loud that I looked at Ryan and told him to call the police. Now this is the part one will never forget. The part one never liked to talk about. While Ryan was on the phone with a dispatcher and telling them our location and what was going on, I stepped around the fire towards my tent. Inside my bag I had a 6-inch fixed blade that I always carried and thought I would feel a bit more comfortable with it in my hand more than just my flashlight. As I went to unzip my tent, trying to keep my eyes toward the woods, I heard some movement directly in front of me. I swept my light up in front of me, and for maybe 2 seconds I saw it. Whatever this person or thing was, it was about 5 feet up in a tree. Everything about it was long. Its arms, legs, neck, fingers, everything. And it was fast. As soon as the light hit it, launched backwards off of the tree. I heard it land, but it either jumped an impossible distance or landed in a thicket, because I heard it but never saw. I don't think I have ever yelled so loud. I ran back to where Ryan was and sat down. He kept asking me what I saw, but I couldn't answer. I just kept thinking about what I saw. Maybe 10 minutes later we saw a couple of flashlight beams coming through the woods, and about 3 guys came into view asking if everything was okay. I settled a bit and started asking them if they had seen or heard anything. All they said was they heard a lot of movement and then heard my scream, and that's when they headed in our direction. I tried to explain what had happened without sounding crazy, but it didn't seem to work. One of the guys walked around a bit and came back and said he didn't see anything. Ryan told them that we called the police, and roughly 30 minutes later a park ranger showed up. Ryan and I tried explaining everything to him, but he just chalked it up to either a curious animal or some campers trying to mess with us. Either way, Ryan and I decided we weren't staying the night. We packed our stuff up and walked out of the woods with the ranger. He took our statement and we got in our car and drove home. Ryan and I don't talk about what happened that night, but neither of us have been back to Jack's River Trail and will probably never go back. Third story. If missing livestock returns, kill it immediately. When I was 23, I had a security gig at a dairy farm outside of Delphos, Ohio. It was a modest place, only holding a few dozen cows at any given time. My then co-worker, a 34-year-old recovering meth addict named Corey, had just been fired for letting a cow go missing on his watch. A fireable offense in every sense of the word. For starters, Corey was insane. By the time I'd met him, drug-induced psychosis had rendered him virtually schizophrenic. On long nights spent with him during my training period, he'd tell me about CIA agents that were out to get him. He was convinced that they were broadcasting thoughts into his head via electromagnetic waves, and that they would stop at nothing to ruin his life. More than once, I'd catch him glancing over his shoulder, or peeking out of windows with a dumb look on his face, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was following him. That's the type of person that Corey was. Each of our cows had an ear tag labeled with a number. At 8 p.m., they were each to be guided into their own respective stalls and locked in for the night. Padlocks became the norm after an incident with local kids a few years earlier. In the mornings, we'd have to carry around a clipboard containing each lock combination and individually release each one. It made for an annoying way to start the day, but the cows were a hell of a lot more secure that way. That's what made Corey's story so unbelievable. He had claimed that the previous night, cow number 29 had been locked away in her stall along with the others. He told us that the only thing out of the ordinary that night was an obnoxious bat stuck in the rafters that he planned to deal with in the morning. In order for his claim to be true, an intruder would have had to unlock the barn with a set of keys, unlock 29's stall with the correct combination, then reset both of the locks and leave undetected. Either that, or they picked up a 1,600-pound animal and leaped through a window. Considering Corey's nasty habit of abandoning his duties in order to twitch and hallucinate in the corner, a small part of me believed that some two-bit thief might have been able to get one over on him. My boss, however, a 50-year-old hothead, concluded that Corey must have been involved with the cow's disappearance and promptly kicked him to the curb. With nobody else to fill his position, my boss had offered to pay me extra for each of his duties that I could complete until we received a new hire. Naturally, I agreed. I'd be heading back to school in a few weeks and needed all the money I could get. My first night back at work began normally. Since I'd now be doing the work of 2 security guards, I'd arrived early to get a head start on Corey's checklist. I started by sweeping out the barn. Farmhands tried to keep the TMR in a long pile just in front of the stall doors so the cows could eat throughout the night, but that shit practically painted the floor by the time I got there. Midway through, I'd noticed something reflective in the corner of the barn. I lazily swept a loose bit of corn and hay over to it to investigate. On the floor before me was a neon yellow ear tag. I picked it up to examine it. 29. Next to 29's ear tag were the skeletal remains of a bat. I guessed that was just another thing that Corey never got around to dealing with. I swept up the bones along with the rest of the barn. By the time I was finished, it was already 8 p.m. I made my way out to the fields and then, one at a time, I guided each cow to its assigned stall. I got through about 10 or so before I noticed something strange. Across the field, about 50 meters away from the others, was a lone cow. It faced away from me, seemingly transfixed on a nearby cornfield. Seeing a cow on its own is nothing strange in and of itself, they need personal space the same as people do. What was strange was the way that her tail stuck straight out from behind her, unwavering. She stood as if she were afraid to slip, with her feet planted far apart. Perhaps the strangest of all, her head appeared to be tilted at a 90-degree angle. I wasn't eager to tell my boss. They'd put down many sick cows before, but losing 2 in the matter of a week might have been enough to send him over the edge. I decided to save that cow for last as I continued to guide the rest of them inside for the night. Being in charge of twice the amount of cows I was used to was time-consuming. It took me nearly an hour to round them up. By the time I'd locked number 36 for the night, it was 9 o'clock. I should have been making my rounds by then, especially given the circumstances. I just had that last cow to deal with. While contemplating how long it was going to take me to unlock each cow in the morning, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The only stall left empty was number 29. I shuffled to the field. Surely enough, she was there. She hadn't moved an inch since I'd started the process of moving them. I approached her slowly. It was surreal seeing a creature frozen in such an odd position. As I came up on her, I could hear a definite, but muffled, chittering. It was unlike any noise I'd ever heard from a cow. "What did you eat?" I thought to myself. I whistled to the cow before approaching her to avoid startling her. On a dime, the chittering ceased. The cow's left ear rose to face the sky and began to oscillate rhythmically like the periscope of a submarine. I could tell that moving this one would be a challenge. I rubbed her back in an attempt to soothe her. Bonding is key when establishing any sort of relationship with an animal. I'd never interacted with 29 before, so we were unfamiliar with each other. Her skin felt bizarre, like clay with hide draped over it. I walked around to see her face. Her eyes were peeled open, darting around rapidly, her mouth hung open and drooped to the side. I examined her left ear, searching for a place to reinsert her tag, but there was no piercing. I strapped a halter to 29's mouth and began to lead her. It was like trying to uproot a tree with a bike chain. Each tug I gave was fruitless. I began to put my weight into it, but still no luck. When I say, no luck, I don't mean that 29 wouldn't follow me. I mean that her body showed zero sign of being affected by my body weight whatsoever. Cows are strong creatures, but they're not made of stone. I was perplexed. After 15 minutes of this, I decided that it was useless to continue on. With the clock ever ticking, I could no longer afford to neglect my rounds. I began to walk to the security post to collect my flashlight and get on with the night. As I pondered my life choices whilst dancing my way through a minefield of cow patties, I heard a slow trotting. I looked behind me, to see that the cow had in fact moved. 29 was now facing me. Not so shy now. I wondered. I turned around and continued walking towards the gate. When I made it halfway through the field, I began to hear the trotting again. It was louder, and much quicker this time. I smiled to myself. Wish I'd known to walk away sooner. Without turning to face the cow, I walked into the barn and began fumbling with 29's padlock. 3 left, 32 right, 23 left. As the lock clicked open, I heard the floorboards behind me creak. A slow vocal droning noise turned to a sickly gurgle. I hope to God whatever you've got isn't contagious, I said before spinning around. All color drained from my face as I was greeted with the sight of the 8-foot-tall beast standing before me on its hind legs. 29's head was cocked sideways with one eye focused on me. Its pupils seemed to grow and shrink rapidly as it scanned over my entire body. Its lower jaw slowly moved up and down as it began to vocalize again. I. It began to creep towards me. Its front legs kicked wildly as it attempted to keep balance, all the while making that same noise. I began to feel lightheaded. I grabbed 29's padlock and made a break for the door. The cow began to rapidly stomp behind me. I began to hyperventilate as I sprinted. The rest of the cows were spooked, shaking and jumping around wildly. I slammed the door shut and clasped the padlock. A sickening boom shook the entire wall of the barn as 29 began to claw at the door. I. The beast croaked before chittering once more. I backed away from the door slowly, its wooden frame bending and contorting at the sheer force behind it. Without another warning, I turned my back to the barn and ran to my car as 29 began wailing and pounding. I never ended up making any rounds that night. Instead, I started my car and left that fucking place in the rear-view mirror. I didn't tell my boss. In fact, I deliberately avoided several of his phone calls because I had nothing to say. I figured it'd be best if I quit the easy way. There are certain things in life that back you into corners. Silence forces your hand, you know. That's why I'm writing this now. Of course I still wanted my money. A few weeks later, just before making my 2-hour commute back to college, I stopped by the farm to pick up my final check. My boss wasn't in his office on Tuesdays, so I took advantage of the situation and granted myself access with the key that I'd seen him not so stealthily kick under the rug once or twice. After snagging my check and a few Jolly Ranchers, I got in my car and slowly began to drive away. Out of the corner of my eye, a young farmhand standing in the grazing field caught my attention. "Hey kid!" I shouted. "Stay away from the night shift." But he didn't answer me. Nor even look at me. He just continued to stare at the pile of bones before him. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Blair Daniels. My son went missing. What came back wasn't him. My 6-year-old son wandered off into the woods behind our house. I thought he was in his room, playing with Legos. But when I checked on him 20 minutes later, he was gone. After tearing apart the house looking for him, I noticed the back door was unlocked. No. He ran out and someone took him. I went catatonic. I called the police, my husband came home, and an all-out search began. When we looked at our security cam footage, it showed little Parker simply walking across the backyard, and wandering into the forest. Okay, I breathed. So he's just lost. As long as we find him soon, everything will be okay. And it was the happiest moment of my life when, 3 hours later right after dusk, one of our neighbors in the search party found him. "Parker," I sobbed as I held him. So happy that he'd come home safe. But that evening, my happiness started to fade. You see, my son Parker is neurodivergent. He's high-functioning, but he still has a lot of quirks that aren't normal for a kid his age. He's obsessed with birds. He can identify everything from the northern mockingbird to the downy woodpecker, and would rather do that than hang out with other kids any day. Food textures bother him to no end, especially dairy, and even just watching me drink a cup of milk or eat yogurt makes him retch in disgust. He throws a fit if anything gets wet, even a drop of water on the tablecloth will send him spiraling. So imagine my surprise when I spilled a glass of water at the dinner table, and Parker didn't react at all. Normally he'd be grabbing the tablecloth and running over to the dryer, screaming at me to get it dry. But instead he just sat there, oddly still, eating his chicken nuggets. I guess he's just too wiped out to care. But as I mopped up the water, I couldn't shake that horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. Later that evening, I sat next to Parker's race car bed, perusing the bookshelf for a book. It was a hard choice, a favorite, like There's a Rocket in Your Pocket. Or should I make him up one of my silly tales about Iris the ibis? I felt like this night wasn't real. Like I was dreaming that Parker was here, safely tucked into bed, and that soon I was going to wake up to him being still missing, still gone. I swallowed that thought and focused on my beautiful boy's face, fighting back the tears welling in my eyes. "Do you want Dr. Seuss, or a story about Iris?" I asked him. He tilted his head. "Dr. Seuss," he said after a second. "Okay." I opened the book and began to read. He didn't notice the tears rolling down my cheeks. Soon it was over and I was turning out the lights. But as I turned on my heel, he called after me. "Can I have milk?" I stopped in the doorway. Parker hated milk. Another one of his quirks. Even watching me drink it made him retch in disgust. Sure," I said, my heart pounding in my ears. Something woke me in the middle of the night. 3:26 a.m., read the time on my phone. Still 3 hours before I have to be up. I sighed, pulled the covers around me, and rolled over. I froze. The door was open. And there, peeking around the corner, was Parker. He was just standing there, watching me sleep. Watching us sleep. And maybe it was my imagination, but in the darkness, it looked like he was smiling. Parker. He dipped out of view and began to run down the hallway. Parker, wait. I called out, jumping out of bed. Parker. I ran out of the room just in time to see him disappear into his bedroom. But I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Because he'd been running down the hallway. On all fours. I woke up before Parker did. Unable to shake the jittery feeling in my stomach, I busied myself by mixing up some from scratch pancake batter and dusting off our waffle maker. Parker's safe. This calls for a special breakfast, I told myself. Then why did I feel like something was so horribly wrong? I poured the thick batter into the waffle maker. It sizzled on contact. As I closed the lid, though, my phone began to ring. Franklin Police, read the caller ID, huh? Hello? Mrs. Zimmerman, a deep voice asked. Yeah. This is the Franklin Police Department, the voice replied. And I'm thrilled to tell you, we found your son. Every muscle in my body froze. What? Someone apparently found him in the development on the other side of the woods, only an hour after he went missing. They've been trying to get in contact with us, but we only just got a hold of them now. He's here at the police station. Would you like to talk to him? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The phone was slippery in my sweat-covered hands. I don't understand, I said finally. We, a neighbor, found Parker, last night. But you're saying. Parker's with you at the station? Before he could reply, I heard a soft footstep behind me. I whipped around to find Parker was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his ice-blue eyes fixed on me. Mommy, he said softly, who's on the phone? Fifth story. Wendigo encounter. This is a repost. I had to fix some spacing errors. I am not sure if this is the right place to post this, but I am scared shitless. After hearing stories and looking stuff up online, I'm fairly sure it was a Wendigo. Me, my son and girlfriend were attacked by something. We were camping up in the northernmost area of Washington. My girlfriend is incredibly superstitious, so she insisted we brought weapons. So I had my combat knife and a 12-gauge shotgun, and she brought a .22 rifle alongside a newly sharpened machete. Our son was just 3 years old at the time. She and I were set on edge from a park ranger, who seemed very tense and uneasy, who stopped us and instead of confiscating our weapons told us to be careful and stay safe, then sent us along our way to the camp. When we got there, we were informed that several visitors had spoken about some unnatural noises and a pale creature that would mimic voices and sounds of people who weren't talking or seeming to be distracted. I laughed and put the idea out my mind, thinking to myself, there's no way. They're fucking with us. But I knew better. So we then reached the area we were going to set up camp. We immediately got a fire ready to light and set up our tent and bags. I fed my son as my girlfriend ate a snack. We decided to get a lay of the area, so me and my girlfriend hiked around for about an hour or so. I had one of those baby carrying backpacks and my son started to get real heavy. Everything seemed normal until I saw something down the almost path we were on. We walked closer to investigate and saw drag marks. It looked as if someone had killed a buck. There was a whole outline in the dirt with a small dried pool of blood, as if someone grabbed it from the antlers and pulled. That wouldn't be possible for any man to do, the buck or whatever it was would have been way too big for that. Shaken, we rushed back to base camp and restarted the fire and hurried back into our tent. Too afraid to leave since it was dusk by now, we stayed inside the tent and my girlfriend put our son to bed. Eventually, probably from the exhaustion of fright, we fell asleep. What must have been hours later, I awoke to a faint rasping sound that sounded like a child crying. I gazed outside in confusion and saw the outline of a creature that seemed to be a buck, standing over something. It seemed to be about 20 feet away. But at a closer glance had unnaturally long limbs for a buck, and was eerily tall. In sudden fear, I unloaded 2 shots into the creature and heard a loud blood-curdling cry. My girlfriend awoke screaming to the shots I had fired as I tried to explain what I had heard. To my surprise, the animal hadn't moved an inch. Then I noticed the stains on the side of the animal. It looked like blood was running down the edge, and lots of it. It stared at me deep into my eyes as I became petrified with fear. A sinister feeling of dread fell over me as if it knew I could not move. I thought to myself, what if it starts to bolt towards us? Just then, this tall, decrepit demonic thing seemed to whisper something. I could N0T exactly tell what it was saying, but it seemed to have said, "I need more, children." My girlfriend screamed, asking where our son was. We blacked out. In the morning we awoke to park rangers at our campsite. We did not see our son anywhere. We told the rangers that he was missing and they started a search party. I explained what had happened and strangely they seemed to believe it. The one who seemed to be older by at least a decade pulled along the one we met earlier and whispered in his ear. I only heard a single line and I'm not even sure if what I heard was correct. It sounded like he said, "It's getting bolder." They didn't seem to want us by ourselves, so they waited with us while they continued the search. We stayed in a log cabin for 3 days with a forest ranger. When suddenly some rangers came into the cabin saying they could not find our son. My girlfriend starts to sob. I start to hate myself thinking that I could have done something if I was not frozen in fear. We rushed outside only to find some injured and frightened police officials. The rangers wouldn't tell us anything of what happened or what they saw. Or why the cops were scared shitless. All we know is that we don't have a son anymore. God help whoever goes into that forest next, and please don't bring your kids with you. 6th story. This story was shared by you/Mr. Frontenac. If you find yourself in the forests of Europe, this could save your life. Full disclosure, I was an anti-masker during COVID. No, it wasn't because they infringed on my freedoms, or that I found it hard to breathe. It was just that masks made my assignment at the time rather difficult. I'm a mercenary, a gun for hire. I contract out through a shadowy outfit based in DC up until 2020. My jobs had all been sandy, the Sahel, Somalia, Afghanistan. Poor places where the big governments like to play war. My jobs were the dirtiest of the dirty work. I did missions that militaries wanted to be able to distance themselves from if something went wrong. It was only a matter of time before I got a fucked up contract like I did in Romania. A memo came in from Bucharest asking for a dozen American contractors with combat experience. I didn't ask questions. The paycheck was enormous for what seemed like a cakewalk compared to keeping up the West's war of terror or shit. I mean on terror. Yeah, that's it, war on terror. All 12 of US were given different arrival dates. When I landed in Romania, 6 soldiers from America were already there and I suspected I'd be meeting up with them, but none of my suspicions turned out right. Upon landing I was put into a taxi hired by the government, and after several hours without so much as a pee break I'm stepping out of the car all groggy with my black duffels and rifle crate. A swath of great forest runs through Romania following the Carpathian Mountains like a backwards L. I was now near the head of that L, by the Ukrainian border. I could hardly believe my surroundings when I got there. I was expecting to join a tactical team for a briefing. What I found was a thatched roof shelter. It was wall-less, little more than a structure to give travelers shelter from the rain for a night. The shelter was stationed at the edge of the forest. It was some kind of checkpoint or resting point before you ventured any further into the woods. There was a single trail that snaked through the dark spruces behind it and disappeared deep into the forest. Something was off about this assignment, but my mind didn't linger on what. I stopped and breathed. The fragrance of the coniferous trees was a balm after 6 hours of smelling my cabbie's camels. But he himself wasted no time getting away from fresh air. The taxi driver slammed his door and sped off without a goodbye. A spatter of mud slapped onto me as the little car puttered away. I flicked a few globs of mud off my sleeves as I went to the shelter. There, an old man tended a fire, cross-legged, while 2 gray-muzzled sheepdogs rested their chins on his legs. I did not speak Romanian. I reviewed the emailed instructions I received. All they said was speak to Boyan once I arrived at the destination. I knew I wasn't being played. My contractor has a system to verify all communications. It was confirmed that the Romanian government had wanted me here, but why? Boyan? I asked and waited for an answer. The old man nodded. Sit, please. He gestured at a dry spot of dirt across the fire. I moved my bags in under the shelter and Saturday, I'm not sure I'm in the right place. Oh, you are. Where are the other soldiers? It is just you and me. I laughed and shook my head. And what's our objective? I take it there's a terrorist outpost in these woods. I pointed at the trees. Or are we after wolves attacking a shepherd's herd? The old man just stared at me until I blushed and looked away. His expression was a quiet condemnation of my arrogance. When his silence had properly highlighted the stupidity of my last sentence, he spoke. There are many tribes in these woods. They choose to live a life, unspoiled. They cut wood, carry water, catch fish. They shun the cities to live in the woods. He broke a few sticks in half and fed them to the fire. The dogs watched the new kindling crackle and burn before gently closing their eyes again. It wasn't always like that. One tribe was so cruel. So cunning. They were the parasite. Parasites. They took what other tribes had instead of making things of their own. They had no fishermen, no smiths, no weavers. Only killers. This tribe, they adapted to kill and feed on humans. They grew fangs. I nodded my head up knowing where this was going. It wasn't Vlad the Impaler but these sick beings that began the legends of Dracula. I see, I said, skeptically. Well, you will come to. Eventually, when nearly every tribe was wiped out, the parasite vanished. Some say the devil took them to be his demons. Others say that they crawled into the earth to hibernate until more people populated these woods so they could kill once more. But the truth of where they went, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that they're back. I stayed quiet for a moment, expecting him to laugh at my stoic expression, to say he was messing with me and that there was actually a terrorist cell hiding out in the caves. But instead, he kicked dirt on the fire and the dogs shot up and shook themselves off. Come. We have several miles to travel before we sleep. Take only what equipment you need. Rifle, ammo. Don't worry about food, I have plenty. He started off down the trail while I stayed sitting. I thought about walking to the nearest village and buying a ride back to the airport. This was ridiculous, but who was I to complain? After all, I was getting paid the same. I assembled my rifle, slung it over my shoulder and left the plastic case behind. In the next few weeks, I learned the world was a much bigger place than I ever imagined. There were full-blown cities in these woods, each ringed with walls of spruces that had been sharpened to spikes and teeming with hundreds of inhabitants. They made their own clothes, soap, and cookware. It was like I had stumbled through a portal to the medieval ages. I stayed with Boyan off one of the main roads that connected the villages. He had a hut there, and I learned that his job was to act as a kind of highway patrol. He taxed trade between villages and made sure bandits weren't raiding the roads. But there was hardly any trade or traffic between villages when I started. The air was quiet with fear. Apparently, a family homestead had been attacked a month back. Holes were found on their necks, draining their bodies dry. The whispering and the rumors swirled that they were the parasite, but none of the attackers were seen. With so much wilderness patrolling one road felt useless, but Boyan said the legends were true and in order for the parasite to reach a village they must be invited inside. They can't just sneak there through the woods. To be honest, the assignment didn't have my full attention. It felt like a joke. The other 11 contractors that were hired had the same job as me, they were assisting other patrols between villages. Boyan did have a radio and no unusual activity had been reported by any on the sentries on the road. Until one by one, they went dark. It started further down the mountain range, first it was the outpost near the Serbian border. Then the woods of central Romania went quiet. It was making its way towards us. We used to get a wagon or two a day coming from the south, but all travel suddenly ceased. When the village caught word that communication with the south was gone, I thought they'd flee to the cities. Instead, they closed their shutters, barred their doors as soon as it was dusk, and loaded their rifles. It felt like something was coming. One day when Boyan and I were watching the road, a rickety wagon approached pulled by a pair of mules, their ribs bulging against their fur. Boyan and I looked at one another and I shouldered my rifle, stepping out into the muddy road. With not much else to do, I had dived into learning Romanian my first few weeks here. While I couldn't much speak it or read it, I could understand the gist of Boyan's conversations at this point. He did most of the talking while I stood tall and menacing with the rifle across my chest. The protocol for our road patrol was simple: check the teeth of all persons to make sure they didn't have fangs, and second, make sure there are no stowaways in the cargo. This sometimes meant going through sacks of wool or piles of potatoes, but so far, we hadn't turned up anything. The driver wore a mask and stopped the mules. The beasts stood dumbly in the road, blinking lazily. "What is your business on these roads?" asked Boyan. I looked at the wagon. There were 4 women in the back, wrapped tight in coats. Their shawls covered their faces. "We are fleeing before the storm in the south can reach us." Boyan walked closer and I followed. "What do you know about what's happening in the south?" "Something is coming. We intend to cross the border and stay in the wilderness until this evil has passed." "Well, you can go no further without inspection." As we expected. Boyan gestured for me to go to the back of the wagon. The women all wore masks, too. This was 2020, and COVID was taken seriously here. The people knew if there was an outbreak in any of these remote villages there would be hardly anything town doctors could do and many would die. Teeth, I said and held my mouth open in a smile with my pointer fingers. One by one, the women pulled the heavy shawls up over their eyes and showed me their upper teeth. But even before I looked for fangs, something about their movement bugged me. They moved rigidly. Robotically, like there was something wrong with their arms. The women held their mouths open funny, too. Their lips were pushed and curled up so I could see. They didn't smile like you would for a dentist, but there were no fangs. The last two women who showed me their mouths had fresh blood running from their gums. I indicated that they could let their masks down and walked over the boyan. I pushed him back a few steps so we were out of earshot of the driver and whispered in his ear. No fangs, but something seems off. Some of the women, their gums are bleeding. That is not uncommon, especially when travelers know we're checking teeth. They brush them hard to be polite. But I agree they are strange, but they don't look like parasite. Their teeth, they are real. But what if they stole regular people's teeth? Boyan gave me a funny look. Did it look like that to you? I thought back and to be honest it didn't. Their teeth hadn't been replaced and if they had, the parasite were phenomenal dentists. No, I said. May we go to the village? Asked the driver. Boyan and I looked to each other. We were both on edge. If it weren't for our anxiety it was possible we might have found nothing out of the ordinary with this inspection to begin with. Boyan waved them on. You may go. Safe travels. The driver raised one arm in farewell and Boyan and I both watched him with skeptical squints. There it was again, that strange robotic movement. We stood in the road while the mules plodded on, listening to the cart moan and creak until they were up the hill and out of sight. That night, Boyan and I ate supper in silence. I was getting paid weekly so there was no completion clause for my contract. I remember I was thinking about leaving that very night when Boyan and I looked up at the same time. There was a sound on the wind. A wailing. We burst outside of his hut where the noise was clear. The nearest village was almost 3 miles up the road, but we heard the screams clear as day. I started gathering my things and Boyan was already sprinting. As we got closer, we smelled smoke and could see the orange glow of flames flicker in the sky. In the time it took to get there the screams had ceased. The gate to the village was left wide open, invitingly. Boyan and I slowed and walked silently the rest of the way. The village still made noise, the fire leaping hut to hut was crackling, whistling and roaring. We got to the mouth of the gate and I froze. My combat experience didn't prepare for this terror. There's speed to a firefight, a forgetfulness of fear. But this had me shaking like a child. There, inside just the gate, were the bodies of the coach that had passed by hours earlier. The man and the 4 women. Boyan bent and turned one of them over and we both jumped back at how easily the corpse moved. It was weightless. I set my rifle barrel against the chest of one and prodded with it. The entire chest was empty. No organs, no bones. It was like that for all of them. Their legs and arms were hollow tubes. And their heads, they'd been cut in two and stitched back together. The parasite, I said aloud. They massacred them when they got to the village. They were already here, waiting for more people to come. No, said Boyan stepping backwards. No, he started to sprint away into the woods. Trojan horse, he shouted back at me. Hey, wait. But I stayed still, realizing what he meant. It was why their movements were so mechanical earlier. It was why some of their gums leaked blood. The parasite had emptied these humans out. Spooned out every last ounce of flesh and stuffed themselves inside. Oh, fuck. Oh fuck. I said while beginning to follow Boyan. You see, it was our fault. We were the ones that had let them in. 7th story. This story was shared by you/Sleepless from Sundown. An encounter with a Wendigo. At 1 minute to midnight I took out the shot glass and put it beside the bottle of Jägermeister. I don't drink anymore after what happened to Pop. The one exception is the first day of September. The house is dark except for the warm glow of the 3 bulbs above the dining room table. I rub my tongue against the inside of my cheek. My mouth always goes dry. The only sound is the incessant ticking of the wall-mounted clock. At midnight the soft bell sounds, a miniature version of church bells. I fill the glass and hold it aloft for a second and swallow with a deep breath. The subtle burn winds its way into my throat and stomach. I wash the shot glass by the light of the moon shining through the kitchen window. Loretta wouldn't mind my drinking, but a used shot glass beside the sink raises questions. And I never like to talk about it. All these years later I still have nightmares. What I saw up on that mountain left a greater impression than any other event in my life. More than my children being born and my father drinking himself into an early grave. Loretta tells me I should talk about it. That it would help. She might be right. She always is. So here goes. I joined the park ranger service right out of school and it was a perfect fit. I took to academics like a fish to the desert and the outdoors always called. I passed my time in school daydreaming of the weekend and hiking or fly fishing with Pop. In the summer of '89, I was stationed in the Appalachians. Our jurisdiction encompassed trails leading all the way up the mountain. Up there the spruce thin out and clouds hang heavy even in fine weather at the base. I spent the summer clearing fallen branches from the walking trails after a couple of vicious storms over the winter. It was hack work reserved for the junior, but the truth of it was I didn't mind. The peak of the summer heat was spent and visitor numbers dropped as the weather began to turn. Persistent drizzle had kept me desk-bound for the morning and we were about to get lunch when he burst through the door. He let out a moan and collapsed to the floor. Stanley leaned down and propped him in a seated position. Water dripped from his shoulder-length hair. His limbs hung limp by his side. I handed Stanley a cup of water. Stanley used his index finger to push down his chin. When the water hit his tongue the man tensed and his eyelids flicked open. He flailed his limbs and knocked the glass from Stanley's hand. The glass shattered on the floor, but the man paid it no mind. "It is out there," he said. "What is?" The man half-turned and gripped Stanley's shirt and made balls with his fists. He repeated himself, pausing after each word. "It is out there." He started to sob. He released his grip on Stanley and buried his face in his hands. We lifted him onto a chair and he pressed his face against the table and bawled. I grabbed the rucksack he had dropped to the floor. On the bottom right was a name tag behind a plastic sleeve. Lenny Porter from San Diego. There was a number at the bottom. "I'll make the call," Stanley said. When Stanley returned, Lenny was sat up staring blankly at the wall with red eyes. His face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in a week. Stanley closed the door. "I spoke to your father." Lenny didn't acknowledge the words. He sat motionless and unblinking. Stanley shuffled across to where I was sitting and pressed his palms on the table. Lenny left San Diego 2 weeks ago with a couple of friends. They planned to spend a month hiking the trail north. The father gave me two names: Freddie and Sabrina. When he heard their names, Lenny leaned over and picked up his backpack. He rummaged frantically until he pulled out a stack of Polaroids. He flicked through the photographs and then slapped one on the table. Stanley and I leaned over. Flanking a fitter and healthier Lenny were what must have been Freddie, tall and wearing a baseball cap, and Sabrina, shorter and wearing a bright yellow top with an almost fluorescent blue belt pulling the fabric tight around her waist. Lenny fingered the photo and tears welled in his eyes. What happened to them? He sobbed and shook his head. He opened his mouth to speak but no words came out. Stanley took a map down from the wall and pushed it in front of Lenny. We are here. Where did you last see them? Lenny blinked away tears and concentrated. He squinted at the map and pressed his index finger down and tapped it. Stanley took a pencil from his breast pocket and marked the map with a cross. I'll notify the police. Get the truck ready to go. During training they told us about search and rescue operations. The Rangers are the first responders. It was part of the job. Twisted ankles and wandering off the trail and getting lost are not uncommon and no reason to get the police involved. But this felt different. I secured the gear in the truck and Stanley appeared, flanked by a police officer in his early 30s. Harry is hitching a ride. His partner will take care of Lenny. We drove up the trail for about 15 minutes with the truck until it grew too narrow and treacherous. We split up the gear between us and set out on foot. Our destination was high up the mountain and far away from the trails. It was almost as if the trails deliberately avoided the area. We hacked our way through the thick forest. How had they ended up all the way out here? Stanley checked his watch constantly as we climbed. He wanted to get there before dark. I figured we would be lucky if we did. Stanley and Harry talked like old friends, asking about each other's wives and children. The park rangers are in effect an extension of law enforcement. It made sense to be friendly with the police, and living in a small mountain town made it almost inevitable. I liked that. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Stanley checked the map. Almost there. Get your torches. All right. Harry reached into his backpack and pulled out a flashlight. I did the same. Do you know what's up this way? Stanley said. I shook my head. Somewhere up here is an old cabin. Hunters used it as a base back when you could still hunt up this way. The cross our friend Lenny put on the map is just about on top of it. Let's see if we can get there before there's no light left. We didn't make it by dark. Twilight gave to night with little warning. Soon we were relying on the light from our torches. Being on a trail in the sunshine lends a sense of security up here, even when you are alone. Now, surrounded by black and with the trail long behind us, an uneasiness grew in my stomach for the first time. Stanley paused and swept his torch. He muttered something under his breath. Harry took a few steps to the right, lowering his head and squinting. There it is, he said. At the farthest reaches of Harry's torchlight the cabin emerged from the woods. Stanley tapped Harry on the shoulder. My eyes aren't what they used to be. The cabin should have been a source of comfort, but it only added to my unease. The roof was half caved in and trees encroached on all sides, gnarled branches reaching out like fingers. The structure looked like it belonged more to the forest than to man. The only door hung askew on warped and rusted hinges. 2 windows had long ago lost their glass. Stanley shouldered open the door with a grunt. Leaves and branches covered the floor, blown in through the open windows and roof. We dumped the gear inside. Stanley took out a lantern and tied it to a horizontal branch a few paces from the front door. He flicked it on and the light shone bright. If there was anyone lost nearby, they could not fail to see it. We split up and entered the forest, guided by our torches. Stanley instructed us to go no further than the reach of the lantern. It was our lighthouse on the horizon. The wind blew in fresh from the north. I buttoned up my jacket against the cold. The beam from the torch was strong, but aside from the narrow cone of light, the forest was a deep and full dark. Stanley and Harry called out the names of the two missing, Freddie and Sabrina. I did the same. Every few steps I stopped and listened. The forest was alive with the scurrying of animals and insects going about their business. And the constant rustling of the wind through the leaves. It was hopeless. This was needle in the haystack stuff. Freddie or Sabrina could be unconscious on the ground a few feet to my left and I would never see them. We should camp and wait for first light. Harry's voice cut through the night, louder and with urgency. I skipped towards the sound as fast as I dared. The two torchlights of Harry and Stanley played close together, the beams of light trained on the forest floor. You might not want to see this, Stanley said as I came up behind them. It was too late. By the light of the torches I saw him. Flat on his back, arms and legs bent at unnatural angles. I almost gagged when I saw his face. The left side caved in, a red, bloody mess fragmented with the white of the skull. The right side was intact, one green eye staring up, wide and unblinking. The remainder of the face had an almost serene expression. It was not the look of fear that you would expect from someone about to have half their face crushed. No skin remained below the neck, the contents of his torso picked so clean I could see his full spine. What did that? I stammered. I didn't get an answer. Stanley fished the Polaroid from his pocket and studied it under the torchlight. He handed it to Harry. It's him. It's Freddie. Harry jumped and swung his torch out into the woods. I swear I heard someone talking out there, Harry said. We've been calling out their names too. No, it wasn't that. It sounded like whispering. It's the wind through the trees. Harry didn't look convinced. He called out the name of Sabrina and listened. Only the sounds of the forest. Stanley shushed him. There's nothing we can do for the boy now. Let's get back to the cabin and radio down the news. Stanley took a few quick steps towards the cabin and motioned for us to follow. He seemed agitated. I didn't blame him. I followed on his heels. Harry lingered, searching the woods with his torch until he too fell in behind. The inside of the cabin felt like a sanctuary. Out of the wind and removed from the mangled corpse of Freddie, my mind processed the sight. I had gutted my fair share of fish, but this was different. I put my hand to my stomach and swallowed hard. I was overcome with a compulsion to repeat my unanswered question. What could have done that? Before I could, Harry gave us some more bad news. There was no response on the radio, only static. It wasn't surprising. The cabin sat in a depression between the peak we crested on our way in and the taller peak beyond. We have to go back, I said. Harry shook his head. Not in the dark and not when there's someone still out there. We don't know if that girl is dead or alive, Stanley said. I heard her. You heard a whisper is what you said. And if she was there she would have come to the light. She'll come to the lantern and we'll wait for her. Harry threw out his arms in protest. Stanley sighed. If she's dead, then we'll find her in the light of morning. If she's alive and nearby enough to whisper in our ears, then she'll come to us. Two rectangles of light shone through the open windows from the lantern outside, but the front room of the cabin still had dark, shadowy corners. Stanley took a second lantern and tied it to an old light fixture hanging from the ceiling. The room lit up as if under sunlight, but a cold light that gave the room a bare and unwelcome feel. I busied myself clearing a space on the floor beside the black pot-belly stove at the rear of the room. Stanley and Harry stood as statues, staring up at the wall behind me. I turned. Etched in black soot onto the blank wall was some kind of monster. Long-limbed and with an elongated skull. It stared back at us through white blobs left clear of black. I took a step back and almost stumbled. What is that? I didn't need an answer. You don't live and work up in the mountains here without hearing the stories. Stories told dismissively by daylight, like you would talk about the monsters you imagined hiding in your closet as a kid. By night and around a campfire the stories take on a graver tone, and the name of the monster is only ever whispered. Wendigo. Of course I had never seen one. But if I had to imagine what one might look like, the painting in soot taking up the full height of the wall of the cabin was an exact match. I waited for one of the two men behind me to dismiss what we saw drawn on the wall. To make light of it and crack a joke. Neither did. Stanley uttered a simple instruction. No one goes outside without a weapon. Our shadows danced on the walls. The lantern hanging from the ceiling did not move. Stanley leaned and looked out the window. The lantern hanging from the tree branch swung back and forth like the pendulum of a grandfather clock. There was wind tonight, but not enough to do that. Stanley bent down and fished a rifle from the bag. My heart beat like a drum in my ears. And then something else. Whispers. What sounded like the whispers of a girl, entreating us, inviting us out into the darkness of the forest. Stanley inched open the door with the muzzle of his rifle. He stepped through the gap and watched the lantern on the tree come to a rest. He stood beside the lantern and searched the corners of the forest illuminated by the light. Nothing moved. Harry unclipped the leather strap on his belt and drew a pistol and went to the doorway. I felt naked and exposed with my hands empty. I took a step backwards, the Wendigo drawn in soot looming large behind and burning a hole in the back of my head. A shadow flashed through the trees and Stanley swung the muzzle of the rifle and shot, the crack piercing the night. He raised the rifle to his shoulder and flicked it from side to side searching for movement. The lantern bobbed up and down. With a rush a long-limbed creature dropped onto Stanley from above. He screamed and wrenched the rifle around but had it knocked from his grip. Harry fired 2 shots and the creature let out a wail. It bounded towards the door and Harry slammed it shut. He pointed the pistol to the closed door and emptied the chamber. Harry took a step back and shot me a glance. Through the whole ordeal I had not moved. I had barely breathed. Was it dead? Was Stanley okay? The window, I screamed. The long thin fingers of the creature wrapped themselves around the inside of the window frame. Then the head appeared, uncannily human-like but distorted and disfigured. The chin elongated and the teeth like razors and drenched in blood. Its eyes white and piercing. Just like the etching on the wall. Harry grabbed me by the arm and hauled me into the back room of the cabin. He slammed shut the flimsy door. The back room was windowless and the only light was a thin strip at the base from the lantern in the front room. We crouched together, our shoulders pressed against the door. We listened. The light patter of footsteps. 2 thin strips of black interrupted the strip of light at the base of the door. Something stood on the other side. "Come out, it is okay." It sounded like Stanley. Had he killed it? "Come out." Harry straightened and I grabbed his shoulder. "Don't open the door," I whispered. "They say a Wendigo can imitate those it kills." My hand brushed against Harry's back and knocked the flashlight from his jacket pocket. I fumbled in the darkness until I found it and I flicked it on. I scanned the room for something, anything we could use as a weapon. I walked away from the door and kicked at the twigs and leaves on the floor. All that was good for was kindling. Something smelled rotten. There must be a dead rat somewhere. "It's Stanley," Harry said. I pointed the torch to him. His eyes were wide and wild. He must have killed it. He smiled at me and took a step back. The door slammed open and carried with it the rotten stench. What stood in the doorway was not Stanley, but the Wendigo. Harry kneeled before it, breathing in the noxious fumes. I shone the torch onto the creature. Its gray skin pulled tight on a gaunt frame. And then something glinted. A belt buckle. Around the creature's waist was the bright blue belt Sabrina wore in the Polaroid. "Sabrina?" I said. It turned to me and paused, tilting its head to the side. I thought I saw a glimmer of recognition, a brief moment where it knew the name. But then it snarled, its mouth opening wide and dripping with saliva. It wrapped 2 hands around the neck of Harry and leaned in. I acted instinctively, without thinking. I jumped at the creature, swinging the only weapon I had, the torch. I brought it down on its head with all the strength and adrenaline I had. It bucked and sent me flying into the front room beyond. I threw out my hands against the fall and grabbed the lantern Stanley had hung from the ceiling. It could not bear my weight and the cord pulled out from the ceiling and I fell with a thud. I jumped up at a burst of warmth from my stomach. The lantern had smashed on impact and the white-hot filament broke free of its casing. I groaned in pain and the creature lumbered forwards. I retreated into the corner of the room and pulled my knees up to my chest. It stood over me and opened its mouth, razor-sharp teeth gleaming white. Then the smell of smoke. The creature hopped and then scrambled backwards. The leaves and twigs covering the floor ignited under the heat from the lamp filament. A small flame burst up and the creature covered its face. Fire. It didn't like fire. I crawled forwards and swept as much of the kindling as I could grab onto the flames. The fire grew and the creature screamed. As smoke filled the room it coughed and spluttered. It made one last effort to come at me and then retreated out of the room and into the forest. I went to the back room and grabbed Harry. We stumbled out of the cabin, the fire now spreading up the walls and to the roof. Stanley lay below the lantern hung from the tree, unmoving and with a chunk of flesh missing from his throat. We ran into the forest in the opposite direction the creature had gone. We first climbed up to the crest and then back down the mountain. We stumbled our way down by the light of the torch. Adrenaline coursed through our veins and we imagined that thing right behind us, stalking us in the dark. When we finally crossed a trail we followed it back down to the ranger station. A team of police and National Guard hiked up to the cabin after the sun rose. The cabin had burned to the ground, the pot-belly stove the only item that survived the blaze. The bodies of Stanley and Freddie were brought down. They said Stanley's flesh had been picked clean down to the skeleton. That was the first day of September, 1989. Sabrina was listed as a missing person and her father spent a month in the mountains searching for her. But she's gone in every sense that matters. Turned to a Wendigo by hunger for human flesh. She transformed into something unrecognizable from where it began. Around campfires people still tell stories of the Wendigo. I don't know if they truly believe they are out there. But I know, I have seen it. Sometimes there really is a monster in the closet. 8th story. This story was shared by you/Smagunji. Strange noises outside my door. Something's outside my room. I don't know who or what it is. I've been staying at my house for the last month and I've been hearing noises outside my door. It all started about 2 weeks ago. It was a little past midnight. I was up watching my TV when I checked the time on my phone. I realized how late it was getting and decided to punch out and go to sleep. I turned off my TV and started to drift to sleep when I woke up to a creak as if someone had been putting all their pressure into a loose floorboard. I sat up and looked around my room and saw nothing. Assuming my mind was playing tricks on me, I decided to lay back down and try to hurry to sleep. When I closed my eyes, I started to plunge into the abyss when I was awakened by another creak. This time it sounded as if someone was walking away. Now almost certain I wasn't going crazy, I grabbed my bat by my bed stand and headed to the door. Not knowing what I was looking for, assuming someone breaking in. I quietly opened my bedroom door and looked down the dark hall, which was barely lit up by nothing but a pungent yellow street light. Down the hall near the corner, I saw a shadow. Focusing my eyes trying to see what it is, barely out of reach of the dim light, I could make out what I believed to be a head. In a mixture of rage and fear of an intruder, I shouted, "Who the hell are you? What are you doing in my house?" Beep! A loud car horn from down the road startled me, and I ended up turning my head to face the window out of fear as my body moved on its own. Turning back to where the person was, I couldn't make out the silhouette anymore. Where did they go? I asked myself. I proceeded to tiptoe down the hall with bat in hand, trying to keep my composure. When I reached the corner, I clenched the bat tight and jumped around it. There was nothing there. What? I just saw them. I slowly reached for the bathroom door knob, sweat drenching my palms. I swung it open, expecting to catch the perpetrator red-handed, but there was nothing. I slowly shut the bathroom door and breathed a sigh of relief. Slam! What was that? I peered around the corner and saw my bedroom door had been shut. Now visibly shaking, I crept back to my room, opened and scanned it. There was nothing. I ran around my entire house, making sure every door and window was locked while checking for someone. Nothing, thinking I was paranoid or just downright insane. I went back to my room, crawled into bed, and had the worst sleep of my life. When morning came, I chalked everything up to it being a wild, lucid dream and went to work. 2 days later, I had my next interaction with this unknown entity. I was sitting up in bed on my laptop scrolling through Twitter, when I heard a light scratching at my door. Startled, I assumed it was my cat trying to get in. I went to let her in, but being so caught up, I realized my cat had passed away not too long ago. Hand on the door knob, I froze, sweat dripping down my forehead. I decided to open my door, but nothing was there. I decided to call it a night and sleep, since I had work in the morning and didn't need to hear my boss chew out for being late. Suddenly I woke up out of nowhere. I'm a heavy sleeper and I could sleep through a hurricane if given the chance to. I opened my phone and read 1:12 a.m., confused about why I suddenly woke up. I panned the room to be greeted by darkness. Then I heard a loud, long scratching noise from the top to bottom of the door was heard. So loud it felt like I had headphones on. After gathering myself from almost shitting my pants, I had a weird wave of nausea hit my head. It was my 20th shot of vodka and I passed out. I woke up in the morning and completely forgot about what happened until I saw the 1-inch thick nail marks along my door. Terrified, I took a picture and left in a hurry to work, skipping breakfast. About a week after that I haven't had anything happen. While brushing my teeth I heard the creaking again, assuming it was my lard body cause I brushed it off. Then my lights cut out, assuming I forgot to pay the light bill. I hurried to finish brushing my teeth. When I went to open the bathroom door I heard a light knock. In shock, I sat in silence, nearly pissing myself. Bang bang bang, the banging kept getting louder. I was in the corner furthest from the door, curled up in a ball, waiting for the door to give any moment. The banging got so loud it was ringing in my head like bouncing a ball in an empty cave. What felt like hours was only a minute. The banging had abruptly stopped. I sat there for a moment trying to figure out what the hell had happened and gathered my composure. Cautiously I opened the door, but there was no one there. I ran through the house trying to figure out what caused that god-awful banging. There was nothing. 3 days ago I was, after not sleeping for what felt like an eternity, it happened again. This time I had what sounded like a dripping faucet outside my room. Then I heard it, a child's giggle. The giggle sounded painful, like it was choking on its mucus or someone trying to get water out of their lungs. The giggling slowly turned into a painful laugh, a cry. The cry was so loud it was painful. I covered my ears to try to stop my head from throbbing. But that didn't help. It was like it was coming from my palms. In tears from my head throbbing, it stopped. I sat there in silence. Out of nowhere a scream so loud it felt like my eardrums ruptured, and I ended up passing out like I was hit in the head by a tire rod. Yesterday I woke up to what sounded like something dragging itself under my bed. Shuffle around and adjusts itself. I sat there frozen, not wanting to alert whatever was there that I was awake. Then I heard the giggle. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed my keys and jumped off my bed. I went to run for the door, but something caught my leg. I looked down and a decomposing bluish-tinted arm dripping water was grabbing my pants. Frantically I pulled and tugged and got free. I booked it into my car and put it in reverse, but before I pulled away I looked up and saw my blinds being pulled open. Just a few inches, signifying someone was watching me as I ripped out of my driveway. I'm writing this to you at 2 a.m. from a motel to warn you. If you hear strange noises outside at night, you're night safe. Your fate has already been sealed to be decided by this creature. She is here for me. I hear her giggles. 9th story. This story was shared by you/Toaster Great Bath Bomb. That isn't my mom. I am currently typing this from the public library, as even the idea of being at home sends a shiver down my spine. My mom had been diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago, but it wasn't a chemotherapy/loss of hair type of cancer. It was a tumor on her spine, pushing slightly on the base of her brain. She got really bad 3 months ago. Barely able to walk without assistance, constant pain. The pressure would build up in her head so much she could tell when and where it was going to rain, even from about 4 states away. I give you this information because last month she wanted to go camping on her own. She wanted to call an Uber, have it drop her off at a campsite, and she would camp for 2 nights. I didn't like the idea of this, but I only allowed it because I didn't know how long she had left and I didn't want to deprive her of a possible last source of entertainment. Before she left she hugged and kissed me with a huge smile showing her 5 freckles. She was still beautiful after all she went through. I wished her goodbye and told her to call me if she needs help with even the smallest thing. The car door closed as it drove off. A few days later, she came back as a different person. She was super positive all the time, like when I was a kid and the tumor didn't exist. She made breakfast, she was active, and seemed to have her pain under control. We went to scan the next day and the tumor was gone. She's spinal cord was still slightly damaged, but she could, after a few weeks of physical therapy, resume full mobility. Now this was great. The doctors had called it a medical miracle, and I didn't leave her side for 2 weeks. She made me breakfast 2 days ago and gave me a huge grin. I looked at her face, admiring her radiant, glowing smile. Her hazel eyes, cinnamon hair, and her 3 freckles. Wait, 3 freckles. I recounted, 1, 2, 3. Where are the other 2? My mom has always had 5. And that was just the first thing I noticed. Every night my mom would write me notes on the counter for me to see when I woke up for school. I hadn't seen one over the past month. I know it's petty, but ever since my sudden sentience at the age of 3 I saw those notes. I was embarrassed by those notes. I missed those notes. And the biggest thing that bothered me was her smell. She always had a scent of cedar wood and lavender. Now she doesn't have a smell. She smells sterilized, like there is no sign of humanity within her. There is something living in my mother's body, but it isn't my mom. My mom is somewhere, I hope, not completely lost. When I left the house to go, she gave me a kiss and told me to be safe. There was this glint in her eye. She knows I know. I don't feel safe and I don't have anyone to call. I'm posting this here before I go home, hoping that people may give some advice. If I went to the police they'd call me crazy, then she'd find out. I just want to know what to do, if I live long enough. 10th story. This story was shared by you/Jack Gossard 57. After what I experienced in the woods, I will never go camping again. The warmth of the sun had begun to fade by the time Melissa and I arrived at the campsite. Located within one of the oldest forests in our state, we had selected the site primarily due to our shared love of exploration and the outdoors. The air carried a crispness that tickled our senses, and the familiar scent of pine enveloped us, reassuring us that we were deep in nature's embrace. With eager anticipation, we set about pitching our tent, the fabric rustling in the gentle breeze. The dancing flames of our well-lit fire illuminated our surroundings, casting flickering shadows that danced across the nearby trees. As the crackling fire glowed in the darkness, we felt a surge of excitement coursing through our veins. The allure of the unknown beckoned to us, fueling our desire to explore the mysteries that lay hidden within the depths of the woods. Leaving the safety of our campsite behind, we ventured into the enigmatic forest, our senses heightened by our anticipation of the adventures that awaited. The serenity of our surroundings gradually gave way to a sense of awe as we marveled at the towering trees, their branches intertwining above us, creating a canopy that obscured the sky. Each step we took, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath our feet echoed through the silent woods. The twilight hours cast a mystical aura over our journey, the fading light painting long, haunting shadows across our path. An uneasy tension settled over our shoulders, as the silence of the woods began to buzz with an indiscernible energy. Nervous glances were exchanged between us, and vague whispers of discomfort danced on our lips. Melissa's grip on my hand tightened, mirroring the rapid rhythm of my heart. In hushed voices, we attempted to reassure ourselves that our unease was merely a product of overactive imaginations. But every rustle in the underbrush, every snap of a twig, pushed that reassurance further from our grasp. The vastness of the ancient woods started to transform from a source of excitement to a labyrinth of anxiety. The looming silhouettes of gnarled tree trunks and twisted branches became an obstacle course, challenging us to find our way. We concentrated on retracing our steps, following the trail markers that had helped us navigate the woods in the past. But this time, they seemed deceitful, mischievous even, as they led us astray. Doubt began to creep into our thoughts, seeping through the cracks in our confidence. Panic knotted in the pit of my stomach as it became apparent that we had lost our way. A shiver ran down my spine as our surroundings began to blur, each tree resembling the next, leaving us disoriented and trapped amidst the foreboding wilderness. Melissa's voice quivered with concern, her eyes searching for any signs of our campsite. Even the comforting warmth of our fire felt leagues away. As night began to blanket the forest, stars began to twinkle overhead. But instead of offering solace, they seemed to mock us, distant and indifferent to our struggles. Fear wrapped its icy fingers around our throats, squeezing the last remnants of confidence from our minds. Though we stood side by side, our once unyielding bond now wavered in the face of uncertainty. The forest, once a place of wonder and adventure, had transformed into an oppressive maze that swallowed our hopes and dreams. We knew we had to find a way out, to escape this claustrophobic nightmare. But where could we turn when every direction seemed equally foreign? Each path we chose led us in circles, deepening our feeling of entrapment. Desperation settled in as the realization dawned on us that we were truly lost. The darkness, once a mere backdrop to our exploration, now became an accomplice to our fear, concealing unknown dangers that lurked at every turn. As the moon gently cast its pale glow upon our disheartened figures, casting ethereal shadows that flickered like specters, we couldn't escape the nagging sensation that something else was out there with us. Our hearts raced as we realized that we were not alone in this forest of shadows. Unseen eyes bore into our souls, making every hair on our neck stand on end. The presence of an unknown force grew stronger, its intentions ambiguously threatening. We took tentative steps forward, our senses on high alert, our minds consumed by the eerie aura that pervaded the woods. The once harmonious symphony of nocturnal creatures was replaced by an unsettling silence. It was in that tense moment that we felt the first true whispers of danger, the inescapable feeling that something sinister lurked concealed in the darkness, stalking us with vicious intent. With every crackle of the underbrush, our apprehension grew, as did our resolve to find a way back to safety. Melissa's hand trembled in mine as her fearful gaze searched for any sign of familiarity, any flicker of hope in this labyrinth of despair. We moved forward hesitantly, like prey sensing the approach of a predator, our steps measured and cautious. But in this newfound depth of darkness, certainty became elusive, and every path seemed to lead us further into the unknown. With no alternative but to keep pushing forward, we pressed on, our determination masking the raw fear that had taken hold of us. The night grew deeper, the blanket of darkness enveloping us in its cold embrace. I could hear the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears, the rhythm becoming one with the ominous silence that enveloped our surroundings. The woods seemed to pulsate with an unnatural energy, a presence that whispered tales of the unknown and invoked a primal fear deep within us. Every rustle of leaves, every gust of wind felt like a prelude to something unimaginable. We were no longer explorers reveling in the thrill of adventure, we had become unwitting participants in a tale that would forever alter the fabric of our reality. As time blurred, the shadows deepened, and the edge between reality and nightmare was fractured. We became mere fragments of what we once were, worn down by the unyielding impediments of the forest and the unspoken specters that haunted us. Yet, as despair threatened to consume us, a flicker of light pierced the suffocating veil of darkness, emerging as a distant glimmer of hope amidst the encroaching threat. Night had fully descended upon the woods, engulfing Melissa and me in its inky embrace. Each passing moment intensified the eerie ambience of the forest, amplifying our growing sense of unease. The trees, once majestic and welcoming, now loomed over us with an ominous presence. Their twisted branches seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers, as if eager to ensnare us within their cold grasp. With careful steps, we navigated the obscure paths that wound through the unfamiliar terrain. The trail markers that had once served as our guiding beacon now betrayed us, leading us astray with their deceitful directions. Our footsteps wavered, our confidence quickly eroding as anxiety and doubt gnawed at our minds. Every sound, no matter how distant or faint, echoed with dreadful resonance in the oppressive silence. The rustling of leaves morphed into wicked whispers, as if unseen creatures sought to communicate their sinister intentions. The woods seemed to come alive with a malicious sentience, conspiring against our very existence. Lost in the disorienting maze, we were mere pawns in this deadly game. The sense of being watched intensified, an invisible gaze that seemed to penetrate our souls. Shadows danced at the corners of our vision, fleeting apparitions that disappeared as we turned to face them. An icy shiver slithered down our spines, freezing our breath in anticipation of an unseen threat. Time lost its meaning in this nocturnal labyrinth. The hours blended together as trepidation clung to our every step. Exhaustion weighed heavily upon us as the darkness persisted, our energy sapped by the relentless pursuit of escape. We fought against mounting despair, holding on to the flickering hope that guided us forward. Through the dense thicket and undergrowth, we trudged onward, hands tightly clasped, seeking solace in each other's presence. Our shared determination tethered us against the encroaching terror, fortifying our spirits in this seemingly never-ending nightmare. Cold tendrils of fear wound themselves around our hearts, strangling our courage and threatening to choke out any remnants of hope. Doubt crept into our thoughts, whispering insidious words into our ears. Were we destined to wander these woods forever, trapped in a loop of despair and terror? Each step forward became a desperate bid for survival, a silent plea to the impassive forest to relinquish its grip on our souls. Time became both fleeting and eternal, the weight of the unknown bearing down on us with unforgiving persistence. The forest offered no answers, only relentless mysteries that taunted our fraying sanity. Unbeknownst to us, our presence had not gone unnoticed. Unseen by our eyes, a presence lurked in the shadows, sensing our vulnerability in seeking to exploit it. The ancient woods held secrets, and we had unwittingly stumbled upon one of the darkest. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that hung heavily in the air. In that moment, a figure emerged from the depths of the forest, an indistinct shape that seemed to blur the line between man and beast. It moved with an unsettling grace, its form shifting and contorting like liquid darkness. Fear seized our hearts as we realized we were face to face with a skinwalker, a being of ancient lore with the ability to take on the appearance of any creature it desired. Its eyes shone with a malevolent glow, reflecting our own terror back at us. Panic surged within us, urging us to run, but our legs felt as though they were rooted to the ground. The skinwalker's gaze held us captive, its intentions unknown but undeniably sinister. "Stay calm," I whispered to Melissa, feeling the weight of responsibility settle upon my shoulders. "We need to be smart and find a way to protect ourselves." Melissa nodded, her eyes locked on the creature. Together, we frantically searched for any means of defense. Our backpacks held only the typical camping supplies, insufficient against a supernatural foe. As if sensing our desperation, the skinwalker lunged forward, its speed and agility defying human capabilities. Adrenaline coursed through our veins as we dodged its advance, barely escaping its clutches. The creature's guttural growls echoed through the forest, sending a chill down our spines. We retreated, putting distance between ourselves and the skinwalker, seeking refuge in the thick underbrush. Heart pounding, we desperately brainstormed a plan, our minds racing to find a strategy that would keep us alive. As we continued through the woods, our hearts raced with a mixture of fear and determination. The encounter with the skinwalker had shaken us to our core, leaving us on edge, constantly scanning our surroundings for any sign of danger. Melissa and I knew we had to move quickly, reluctant to linger in one place for too long. As we pressed on, desperate to put distance between ourselves and the lurking threat, a cacophony of snapping branches and rustling leaves pierced the silence. We froze, our eyes widening in dread. Without a word, we instinctively knew it was time to run. Panicked footsteps pounded against the forest floor, our breaths ragged as adrenaline surged through our veins. We dashed through the underbrush, each desperate leap carrying us further away from imminent danger. The forest distorted around us, resembling a nightmarish labyrinth that sought to confound our escape. Trees seemingly shifted positions, creating a disorienting maze that threatened to engulf us. The treacherous terrain sent us stumbling and tripping, but the desperation to survive fueled our determination. In the chaos and confusion, we lost sight of one another. Melissa's presence faded into the darkness, leaving me disoriented and alone. Panic consumed me as I called out her name, my voice drowned by the overwhelming silence of the forest. Forced to make a choice, I hurriedly decided to continue moving, hoping that Melissa would do the same. Fear clung to my thoughts, but I reassured myself that she possessed the strength and resilience to endure. A part of me believed that our bond would guide us back to each other. Flashlight in hand, I pressed on, relentless in my pursuit of safety. Every shadowed corner held the potential danger of the unknown, but I pushed back the rising fear and focused on finding a way out of this nightmarish realm. Hours turned into an eternity as I traversed in complete solitude. The forest seemed to swallow me whole, its ancient whispers becoming a haunting soundtrack to my journey. Doubt and guilt gnawed at my mind, tinged with the uncertainty of Melissa's fate. Questions plagued me: had she encountered more peril, or had she found her way to safety? My steps became heavy, fatigue beginning to wear down my resolve. Doubts threatened to overtake me, as the weight of the situation bore down on my shoulders. But then, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness, a faint glow ahead, like a beacon of salvation. With renewed vigor, I hastened toward the light, yearning for the respite it promised. As I drew closer, the glow revealed itself to be the soft radiance of a moonlit clearing. A sense of cautious relief washed over me, but the knowledge that Melissa was not by my side cast a shadow over my relief. I took a moment to catch my breath, basking in the cool evening air. As I scanned my surroundings, a tattered piece of cloth caught my attention. It hung from a nearby tree branch, its fabric torn and weathered. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized it as a fragment of Melissa's hoodie. A mixture of apprehension and hope flooded my senses, uncertain of what this discovery meant. Had Melissa passed this way? Had she encountered danger or found temporary refuge? The questions taunted my weary mind, urging me to find answers. Resolutely, I made the decision to search for any further signs or clues that would lead me closer to Melissa's whereabouts. I gathered the fragment of cloth, holding it close as a talisman of hope. With the moonlight as my guide, I plunged back into the forest, determined to unmask the secrets hidden within its depths and reunite with Melissa. As I retraced my steps through the dense forest, a sense of unease settled in my chest. The minutes turned into hours as I called out Melissa's name, but there was no sign of her. Anxiety gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the nagging thought that something sinister may have befallen her. Pushing fear aside, I pressed on, determined to leave no stone unturned in my search for Melissa. Every rustle of leaves or snap of twigs inflated my heart rate, as if amplifying my awareness of the lurking dangers around me. Yet, I couldn't let fear paralyze me. Melissa needed me, and I needed to find her. The moon cast its ethereal glow upon the forest, illuminating my path and guiding my steps. Even as hope flickered within me, a voice in the back of my mind reminded me that time was slipping away. The night was growing colder, and the darkness seemed to thicken as I ventured deeper. With each passing moment, a sense of urgency ignited within me. I switched my focus from calling out her name to meticulously scouring the surroundings, examining every nook and cranny for any signs of her presence. Yet, as my search intensified, the presence of the skinwalkers weighed heavily on my thoughts. At some point, I stumbled upon a clearing, bathed in moonlight and seemingly untouched by the eerie stillness of the forest. My heart raced with anticipation, hoping that this would be the moment I found Melissa safe and sound. But as I stepped closer, my hope dissolved into disappointment. The clearing was serene, devoid of any trace of Melissa. A deep sigh left my lips, mingling with the whispers of the wind. Doubt began to consume me once again. Was it possible that the skinwalkers had taken her? The uncertainty gnawed at my core, but I couldn't allow myself to succumb to despair. I had to keep searching, adapt, and find a way to bring Melissa back. As I pressed on through the treacherous darkness of the forest, my determination to find Melissa burned fiercely within me. Every step forward seemed to carry an air of anticipation, as if the forest itself held its breath, whispering secrets just beyond my reach. Melissa and I knew we had to move quickly, reluctant to linger in one place for too long. As we pressed on, desperate to put distance between ourselves and the lurking threat, a cacophony of snapping branches and rustling leaves pierced the silence. We froze, our eyes widening in dread. Without a word, we instinctively knew it was time to run. Panicked footsteps pounded against the forest floor, our breaths ragged as adrenaline surged through our veins. We dashed through the underbrush, each desperate leap carrying us further away from imminent danger. The forest distorted around us, resembling a nightmarish labyrinth that sought to confound our escape. Trees seemingly shifted positions, creating a disorienting maze that threatened to engulf us. The treacherous terrain sent us stumbling and tripping, but the desperation to survive fueled our determination. In the chaos and confusion, we lost sight of one another. Melissa's presence faded into the darkness, leaving me disoriented and alone. Panic consumed me as I called out her name, my voice drowned by the overwhelming silence of the forest. Forced to make a choice, I hurriedly decided to continue moving, hoping that Melissa would do the same. Fear clung to my thoughts, but I reassured myself that she possessed the strength and resilience to endure. A part of me believed that our bond would guide us back to each other. Flashlight in hand, I pressed on, relentless in my pursuit of safety. Every shadowed corner held the potential danger of the unknown, but I pushed back the rising fear and focused on finding a way out of this nightmarish realm. Hours turned into an eternity as I traversed in complete solitude. The forest seemed to swallow me whole, its ancient whispers becoming a haunting soundtrack to my journey. Doubt and guilt gnawed at my mind, tinged with the uncertainty of Melissa's fate. Questions plagued me: had she encountered more peril, or had she found her way to safety? My steps became heavy, fatigue beginning to wear down my resolve. Doubts threatened to overtake me, as the weight of the situation bore down on my shoulders. But then, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness, a faint glow ahead, like a beacon of salvation. With renewed vigor, I hastened toward the light, yearning for the respite it promised. As I drew closer, the glow revealed itself to be the soft radiance of a moonlit clearing. A sense of cautious relief washed over me, but the knowledge that Melissa was not by my side cast a shadow over my relief. I took a moment to catch my breath, basking in the cool evening air. As I scanned my surroundings, a tattered piece of cloth caught my attention. It hung from a nearby tree branch, its fabric torn and weathered. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized it as a fragment of Melissa's hoodie. A mixture of apprehension and hope flooded my senses, uncertain of what this discovery meant. Had Melissa passed this way? Had she encountered danger or found temporary refuge? The questions taunted my weary mind, urging me to find answers. Resolutely, I made the decision to search for any further signs or clues that would lead me closer to Melissa's whereabouts. I gathered the fragment of cloth, holding it close as a talisman of hope. With the moonlight as my guide, I plunged back into the forest, determined to unmask the secrets hidden within its depths and reunite with Melissa. As I retraced my steps through the dense forest, a sense of unease settled in my chest. The minutes turned into hours as I called out Melissa's name, but there was no sign of her. Anxiety gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the nagging thought that something sinister may have befallen her. Pushing fear aside, I pressed on, determined to leave no stone unturned in my search for Melissa. Every rustle of leaves or snap of twigs inflated my heart rate, as if amplifying my awareness of the lurking dangers around me. Yet, I couldn't let fear paralyze me. Melissa needed me, and I needed to find her. The moon cast its ethereal glow upon the forest, illuminating my path and guiding my steps. Even as hope flickered within me, a voice in the back of my mind reminded me that time was slipping away. The night was growing colder, and the darkness seemed to thicken as I ventured deeper. With each passing moment, a sense of urgency ignited within me. I switched my focus from calling out her name to meticulously scouring the surroundings, examining every nook and cranny for any signs of her presence. Yet, as my search intensified, the presence of the skinwalkers weighed heavily on my thoughts. At some point, I stumbled upon a clearing, bathed in moonlight and seemingly untouched by the eerie stillness of the forest. My heart raced with anticipation, hoping that this would be the moment I found Melissa safe and sound. But as I stepped closer, my hope dissolved into disappointment. The clearing was serene, devoid of any trace of Melissa. A deep sigh left my lips, mingling with the whispers of the wind. Doubt began to consume me once again. Was it possible that the skinwalkers had taken her? The uncertainty gnawed at my core, but I couldn't allow myself to succumb to despair. I had to keep searching, adapt, and find a way to bring Melissa back. As I pressed on through the treacherous darkness of the forest, my determination to find Melissa burned fiercely within me. Every step forward seemed to carry an air of anticipation, as if the forest itself held its breath, whispering secrets just beyond my reach. Suddenly, a rustling sound echoed through the trees, causing my heart to skip a beat. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the gloom, and there, illuminated in its beam, were the unmistakable figures of the skinwalkers. Fear surged within me, threatening to paralyze my every move, but I couldn't afford to succumb to it. Melissa's safety depended on my courage and swift action. With a deep breath, I mustered my resolve and faced the dark figures, ready to confront them head-on. The skinwalkers moved with an eerie grace, their shapes shifting and twisting in the flickering light. In my mind, I conjured memories of the stories told about their malevolence and their dangerous abilities. I knew I had to be cautious, to protect myself while also trying to find a way to free Melissa from their clutches. As I took a step forward, they lunged at me, their eyes glowing with a haunting intensity. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I dodged their advance, my senses heightened, desperately searching for an opening. With each evasive maneuver, I moved closer to Melissa, determined to set her free. A chaotic dance ensued, the forest becoming a battleground between the skinwalkers and me. Branches snapped underfoot, leaves rustled, and the moon bore witness to our struggle. Time seemed to stretch, every second a testament to my resilience and unwavering love for Melissa. Finally, seizing a momentary distraction, I broke free from the clutches of the skinwalkers and raced towards a secluded spot where Melissa was held captive. Her eyes met mine, a mix of fear and hope shining within them. Silently, I reassured her that help had arrived. Carefully, I untied the ropes that bound her, our hands trembling but filled with determination. We didn't have a moment to spare. As we made our escape through the dense forest, the skinwalkers pursued us relentlessly, their dark forms never far behind. With each step, our desperation grew, propelling us forward. We navigated through tangled thickets, jumped over fallen trees, and pushed our bodies to the limit. But a small sliver of hope still burned within us, urging us to keep going. Finally, as the first glimpses of dawn painted the sky, we emerged from the depths of the forest. We gasped for breath, our lungs heaving with exhaustion and relief. We had made it. Together, we stumbled back to where we had parked our car, the sense of freedom overwhelming us. We collapsed into the seats, our bodies exhausted but our spirits soaring. The encounter with the skinwalkers had only strengthened our bond, solidifying the depths of our love and the resilience of our will. As I turned the ignition and the car roared to life, Melissa reached out, her hand finding mine. We shared a knowing glance, a silent promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them united. Days had passed since our escape from the haunting depths of the forest, and Melissa and I attempted to resume a semblance of normalcy. Yet, a sense of underlying unease lingered within me, casting a shadow of doubt over our newfound freedom. Subtle changes in Melissa's behavior caught my attention. There were moments when her gaze seemed distant, filled with an otherworldly longing. Her movements became more fluid, her grace seemingly beyond human capabilities. It was as if an invisible barrier stood between us, creating an unsettling disconnect. The weight of uncertainty pressed upon my chest as I looked into Melissa's eyes, longing for a connection that no longer seemed attainable. Yet, it was the way she stared through me, as if gazing into a void beyond my existence, that sent shivers down my spine. The warmth and familiarity that once radiated from her gaze had been replaced by something chillingly distant, leaving me feeling like a stranger in her presence. In the depths of my soul, a chilling realization began to take hold, an eerie understanding that the forest had not stolen Melissa away, but instead, it had birthed something far more sinister. As the whispers of the wind carried an unsettling melody, I couldn't escape the bone-chilling truth that the woman I once knew, the love of my life, had become a haunting presence, an embodiment of the very darkness that had lurked in the depths of those woods. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.